You're listening to the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Bill McIntyre, and it's time for this week's Long Island News, the show that talks to newsmakers from Nassau and Suffolk County that matter to Long Island and Long Islanders like you. So each week, we'll have a conversation about issues that affect all of us. I live on Long Island, and like all of you, I'd like to know more about where my tax dollars are going and want to know more about the people making the big decisions that affect all of us, which is what this show is about. And our guest today for another show is Rabbi Anchelle Perl, the rabbi at Chabad Mineola since 1990 and the host of Jewish Talk, heard Sunday mornings now at a new time of 8 a.m. right here on 90.3 WHPC. Well, hello again, Rabbi.
Thank you again, Bill, for inviting me back. I really enjoyed being with you and look forward to this second opportunity.
We should do a show together.
I'd love it.
Well, I've listed so many things that I would, like to talk about. We have some, there's current news I would love to hear your take on. Interesting that I can't really remember. The Supreme Court just did the thing with the gun laws in New York, saying that the New York gun laws are unconstitutional. And now the state government has to play catch up. I don't know what to say about the things that happen in politics. I think I don't know who's ruling the roost. I really don't. Some of the things are just absurd. We had an issue just the other day with the Smithtown libraries, and they have since reversed their decision after much pressure from the community, which was good to see. But how it got there in the first place is troubling. Again, your story about the tall boy and the short boy, somebody was spending their time pushing somebody else down rather than standing on a chair.
I must tell you, Bill, you're bringing up something very, very, very important. And I think none of us really are given the opportunity or take the opportunity to think too much about anything anymore these days. Everything is a soundbite. And the current issues with the guns and abortions and stuff like this, I think all boil down to a central theme. How we look at something. The mass shootings, as an example, is a symptom. It's not the illness. Mm-hmm. How people look at abortions or all these very, very important issues boils down to a very, very an important thing that somehow has gotten lost in the source here. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the fact that for some odd reason, people are feeling removed from each other. There's a lot of antagonism about each other's opinions. It's either black or white. There's so much division from the top all the way down, hostility. And because of that, people don't think too much about anything. It's just about what that person is, which party he or she belongs to, or associations. Mm-hmm. And but I think all of us can agree on one thing, and that is the value of the sanctity of life, and saving people's lives is so important, whether it's in the gun issue or whether it's in the abortion issue. We all can agree about this. But I think that a lot of us have failed to appreciate the importance of each and every one of us as individuals. What do I mean? People think of what's going on in Washington and in the Supreme Court, that they are the ones of influence. But the individual person, nobody really cares about what we are doing at our home or anywhere else. And because of that, people are not looking at themselves too much. It's easy to look at others. Mm-hmm. And I want to bring you back to 1981, Bill. This is when President Reagan was shot. Mm-hmm. And the gentleman recently was let go. And the Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson again, he addressed this issue in a public talk. And he emphasized that we're all great at reactive. Oh, this is terrible. Gun laws, this law, that law. We're great in reacting to the problem, but we're not spending enough time on looking at in the preventative level. How come an 18-year-old could, besides grabbing the gun, but how could an 18-year-old in their mind, not just in Uvalde, in other cases, or any of any age, want to go and destroy another human being? What's the source of that? It's not the gun. And I'm not a pro or anti-gun guy, but it's not the gun that's killing the people. There's something in the human being themselves that's lacking. And the Rebbe addressed this issue when President Reagan was shot. And he said the way to address this is through the proper education. Children have to be taught from young age that it's up to them, not just simply education and knowledge and adding and abstract and all the other, calculus and everything else. Every one of our children, every one of ourselves must remember that we are here to make this world a good place for themselves and their family, and even for people who've never met me before. An emphasis must be made again of the absolute, let's call it spiritual goal that we all have, each of us in our own way. But there's a deficiency today in the moral education in many quarters of this world, where children are not hearing about a superpower. And I'm not getting involved in which religion, just the idea that there is something that transcends us. It's not about our narcissistic way of thinking and doing. There's something that is expected of us as human beings to act in a moral way. Now, the Rebbe's approach to this was, particularly in public schools, where there is an emphasis, more on the academics, to bring in a moment of silence. A moment of silence. Not a moment of prayer. Right. That's problems. A moment of silence. And not the teacher, not the principal, nobody in the school would tell the children what that moment of silence is about. It's up to the parents to teach them that during this moment of silence, think about helping somebody, what good deed you may do for the community. Think about God, bringing that into the person's life. That will help a person have more respect for another human being. Because when it comes to, God forbid, those who think about killing others, they don't need guns. We've seen around the world, I don't want to even use the word machetes and all the other terrible things that we read about. Mm-hmm. You don't need, I'm a chaplain in the Nassau County Jail. Mm-hmm. And I know what a shank is, what people can do in even such an environment. So the people who are doing these things are people who have not been taught properly that there is an ideal in this world. There's a God is watching us. And that moment of silence is desperately needed in the public school environment in particular. In the private schools and the yeshivas and the religious schools, etc., of all religions, that comes naturally with the whole style of learning and the curriculum. But if you don't have that and you grow up without any thought of spirituality, of something greater than themselves, it can lead to these kinds of reactions. This is how the Rebbe said, when you teach children the importance of helping others, about being kind to others and sharing others, and that there's an existence, that ingrains a person with a sense of morality. That is missing today. Mm-hmm. The videos, the terrible craziness that goes on, and what kids are fed when they're younger. And of course, no one's blaming. I'm not being judgmental. Mm-hmm. Parents are working very hard to bring up their children and pay the bills. But if you don't have, for example, in my world, Friday night on Shabbos, we disappear from the world. Right. We're in the synagogue where a family sits around and reads, shares words of divine providence, reflecting on the blessings of the week, hearing about stories of saintly persons. Makes a difference in the person's look at other ones. Doesn't mean a person can not burst out with anger or be upset with someone else.
People.
That's an inner conflict that we constantly have to work on and grow. But there has to be a basis of knowing there's an ear that hears, an eye that sees, and in a positive way bring up children. And it we somehow relegated the upbringing of our children to the school. It's not true. The home has to be the basis, and that's why I say that all these mass shootings are symptoms of something deeper. It's not the illness. That's not the illness. The illness is much deeper than the guns and other things like that.
Well, we look at the atmosphere again. What we're in. People call for unity, and it's going to be difficult to figure out how to make that happen. With some of the politicians that I've spoken about, I bring up what went on. It's an insurrection. I guess that's all you can call it. Louis Gohmert in Texas brought up a suit to the court that 127 lawmakers signed on to. And what that would have done was disavowed the votes of 5 million Texans. Then some of these same people looked for pardons. And now, so my question to, I believe it was John Kamen I was speaking to, and it was a good conversation. I said, how does unity work in there? How's that gonna work? It needs to be cleansed somehow. And in the weeks of doing these shows and looking at these problems and these issues, we've come down to think that the only way things are going to get better is if we each start treating the person next to us civilly, with some consideration. It's as simple as holding the door for the person that's behind you. There's no need to evaluate. Is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? Is he this? He's a human being. That should be enough. That's the other thing in this atmosphere that we forget. People's worth. Too many times, that's come down to dollars and cents. And we've lost sight of the fact that a human being is intrinsically worth everything. Not what he has, not his possessions. And we do. We have to get back to that.
To add to what you just said so eloquently, Bill, not only are we human beings, but we're divine human beings. Rabbi Schneerson wrote a letter to the president of a synagogue in Europe after a terrible anti-Semitic attack quite a few years ago. And the Rebbe made the point that there is no pecking order amongst human beings. We all created, in the biblical story, the Torah, was one man and one woman. That's where we all came from. So there's no pecking order about one person being more than anybody else. Obviously, each of us, as life went on, God has given different cultures and different missions for different groups. But the foundation that all of us come from one God, if that was kept in mind, like you say, but the divinity, the divine side. Now, for example, I'm a second-generation Holocaust survivor, which means my father went through the terrible camps. He was chosen by the infamous Dr. Mengele, misunderstood what the doctor was saying. He told him to go to the right, which was to go to work, and he went to the left, where his father, who I'm named after, was those who were going to go to the chimneys, going to be gassed and cremated. And then God came over and threw him to the other side, said, you go to work, Arbeit. Now, I'm alive thanks to my father. And one of the things I want everyone to understand, that my father had every right, so to speak, to live with a life of hatred and of others. I mean, he saw his own life, his parents, family, community, etc. But not once in all the years did my father ever share with me words of hatred about anybody, of any person, of any religion, of any background. So I grew up and understanding that life is about recognizing the mission that God has sent every human being. And the more we recognize that, the more the politicians would get on. They could have a conversation. They don't have to agree with everything. But if there's the premise that we're all trying to make this world a home for the Almighty God, we're here to give God pleasure, not ourselves, a lot of this stuff would just fall to the side. And we're just aspiring, it's a slippery slope. We have an expression that when the fish starts to stink, it starts at the head. And I think those who are in leadership positions, I don't care who you are, what party or religion, if there's problems there. So my point is that if we simply look at each other as a human being, then you have the Nazis and other groups in the world, even in our times, they themselves decide, well, you are a human being and you're less than a human being. But that only happens to people who think of others as they've decided what a human being is. But if we decide it's based on God creating Adam and Eve, and then we've moved on with our own missions, etc., and making this beautiful world into a beautiful place for everybody, then there wouldn't be this hatred. That's how I see it. And if each of us are positive, upbeat examples of what life should be in a moral, caring, involved way, people will respect you. People respect each of us if we're proud of who we are, As soon as we try to be like somebody else in some negative way, then people say, I can't trust you. You're insincere because you're not being who you are supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
If I may I tell us a little story?
Oh.
Bill, and I thank you and all your listeners for the opportunity here today. Way back, Bill, there was a rabbi, who's the head of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, who works very hard against Simon Wiesenthal Center of Tolerance in Los Angeles. And this rabbi was a rabbi in British Columbia many years before, and he was invited by the Queen of England, who's celebrating her her Jubilee celebration. Comes from England. You understand what I'm telling you. Story. Mm-hmm. So he's religious, he's observant. So he wasn't sure. He was invited to this beautiful party, but it's not kosher. So he tells the palace, he said, no, don't worry. We'll provide you with kosher dishes and kosher food. Fine. He accepts, of course, doesn't want to, let the queen down. He comes and he's given his dishes and he's given his food. Suddenly the queen says, we're going to now change tables like musical chairs. Why just sit with the same people? Now, for the next course, you'll be here, you'll be there. And so he's now, what's he going to do with himself? He's got his kosher dishes with him over here, but he goes to the other table. So what did he do? He decided he'll pick up his dishes and his food and start moving over to the next table. So there was a Jewish judge from Canada. He says, this is disgusting. You look like a schnorrer. You look like you're in the palace here and you're walking around with your dishes. I mean, this is not becoming. So he said, listen, with all due respect, the British royalty is 500 years. But the laws of keeping kosher, like thousands of years, goes back to Moses. And I think Moses is not that much, can be reckoned with a little bit as well. So, of course, the guy was a little bit embarrassed. Okay, so now the rabbi's walking from table to table to table. Prince Philip, who just recently passed away, says, Rabbi, what are you doing over here? What are you walking around with the dishes for? So he tells him the laws of kosher. I'm afraid if I go to the next table, another dish, maybe with shrimp and who knows what. So the prince is so excited, calls over the queen. And the queen, they're having this huddle about the laws of kosher and why Jewish people are careful what they eat. Now, this judge who had made this point of telling the rabbi, hey, it's not so nice what you're doing, sees that they're having this conversation. He introduces himself to the prince and says, I'm a Jewish judge from Canada. He says, if you're a Jew, how come you aren't walking around with your dishes? So the point is, the moral of the story is, whoever you are, just be proud of who you are. Stop worrying about someone else. If you are who you are and you're into what you are, you transcend your own life with meaningful things, there would be absolute peace in this world. And, you talk about guns, the ultimate role, the ultimate prophecies, about war is that they'll be turned into plowshares. Right, and the famous UN saying is from Isaiah itself.
That's right.
Ultimately, so the ultimate goal of weapons and guns is to be turned into golf clubs and into signs at the WHPC and computers. That's what you use metal for, for good things.
I thought of a story, and I can't think of who the rabbi was. Maybe if I tell you the story that I heard. There was a story about this rabbi, very, very famous. So this probably is 800 years ago, or maybe 600 years ago. He's walking down the street, and there was a group of people, and one man separates himself from the people, and it goes over and it says to the rabbi, "Can you tell me what's in the Torah?" And that's a big question for. And he said, I just want to know, and there's really no place else, and you're the guy, so I want to ask you what's in the Torah. And the rabbi turns around and says to him, well, let's see, don't do to other people what you don't want done to you. And he said, the rest is commentary. He said that's pretty much what it's trying to tell you.
Bill, yes, that's a story from Hillel from Talmud. That's exactly right. You told the story perfectly, as if you like Bill. You must have gone to Hebrew school to know all that.
Well, as we spoke to before, Rabbi Middleman from Hofstra was a good friend. We hit it off, and I took as many of his classes as I could take that fit my curriculum requirement, introduction to the Old Testament. And we had some very spirited discussions in the classroom. And at that time I was a candidate for ministry in the Methodist Church. So he would say, okay, he would give his talk, and then he'd say, okay, well, now what's that side of the story? And it was really a lot of fun.
I must say that Rabbi Middleman of blessed memory was a good friend to so many, and was an inspiring leadership for many years at the Hillel at Hofstra. The story that you mentioned, why would it be, though? That's the question. Why would it be? Why would the rabbi, this great rabbi, say, just don't do to others what you want done to yourself? Why would he say that was the foundation? I mean, there's so many hundreds and hundreds of different laws and different.
Right. But isn't that that's what we're driving at, though, right?
Yes, that's exactly the point. If a person has that respect, that spiritual respect and the divinity of another human being, and understands and knows that every human being has a mission, and then there's going to be peace over here. A person will look at all the other laws related to himself in responsibility to God and to mankind, both with the same intensity. The Ten Commandments were given on 2 tablets. Why on 2 tablets? Because the first 5 between man and God, and the second between man, and they were both given at the same time. A person's appreciation of God is only reflected in how they respect others, and a person has to respect others, other human beings, with the same respect that they must give God. They're both interrelated. You can't, once you separate them, you got war, and you got all kinds of things, like I mentioned about Nazis, who they decided who human beings can live. They decided this one to be murdered and tortured, etc., as opposed to the Aryan race, all the other things. As soon as you separate that relationship between man and God and man, and God to God and God to man, then you're in trouble.
Right. You're no longer in sync. I find something, there's an interesting, and this is, of course I make a left-hand turn because that's where my brain goes. I play music. I'm a drummer. And there's a thing we call entraining. And the idea, if I took a heart cell from you and it took a heart cell from me, they beat. A single heart cell will have a beat to it. And if I put them in a petri dish and I wait a little while, when I come back, both of those cells will be beating together. So the idea with the music, I have gotten the experience where I get to play in a room and the drums will start first. And you'll hear people talking. And then as the beat continues, you can start to see that pulse in the whole audience. So they're all on the same page. And it's
beautiful.
It's a beautiful thing. And it makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up when realizing that I did this in a room for rhythm. And then I read a quote the other day that it said that rhythm in all of its various manifestations is one of the most healing powers on planet Earth.
Bill, think of this. If you're talking and I interrupt you and I start talking while you're talking, that's called an interruption. But if you're singing or playing music and I start to play music, that's called a harmony. See the difference?
Yes.
And every human being creates music. You don't have to be in a band or a drummer, etc. Right. Every one of us creates music. By the nature of being alive, by nature of filling this world with goodness and kindness, by living this world with kindness to other people and seeing the divine image in everybody, that creates harmony. Mm-hmm. In our tradition, there's a whole book how birds sing. They have their language. Animals sing. Human beings. And it's really one big chorus. We're all playing different roles. Mm-hmm. But the music is the same.
I think one of the things we forget too, though, is like we had the opportunity as a band, believe it or not, we toured Japan, and now this is rock and roll. I mean, it's and you expect to meet some really crazy people that are I never saw so much respect. We would show up early for a sound check. The other bands were bowing to us and to each other as they were introduced. And people probably aren't aware. I mean, I know I wasn't. But when someone in Japan, when they bow to each other, they're bowing to the divinity in the other person. Not the person, the divinity within. The same as when a judge enters a courtroom and the bailiff says, "Please rise." we're not rising for the man. We're rising for the robe.
Right. The austerity of the occasion and what's about to be. Yes.
Yeah. Right. And I think we lost track of that too.
If a person, I always tell little stories, but there's a rabbi who had his ritualarium at the top of a hill, and typically to get there you had to go around the circular staircase. Somehow he was able to always go up and down through the winter and in terrible, and never slip. And they asked him, what's your secret? How is it you're able to go up and down without falling? Everybody else has to take the circular staircase. He says, if you bound above, you don't fall below. If a person lives in a higher standard, everything they do in their mind, mind has a very tremendous impact. If a person's mind is appropriately focused on the good in the world and around us, then the person won't fall into the abyss of distortion and all the other garbage that we have to deal with.
Yeah. I tell you, Rabbi, after this show is over, I'm going to feel like I've been at Chabad and heard a sermon. Do they call it a sermon? Is it a sermon?
Yes, it's a sermon. But it's either called a drasha or a word of Torah. The most important part of the whole speech is, of course, the opening lines, which usually is a joke. Mm-hmm. I always open up with a joke, and one of my liners is, that rabbis are now learning to become learning how to fix roofs, because they're always worried about the hereafter. Okay, never mind. Now you know why I've lost my congregation.
You just got to give them time. It took me a minute.
I got Kim to laugh. That's to me. It's
well, she's smarter than me. Oh boy, we're going to have to make a plan to do like 5 more shows. Like I say, we should have a radio show. We really should. I really like your perspective, and I like the things that you bring that I think people have forgotten. We don't exercise that part of our makeup enough. The tea ceremony, that kind of idea, where those, dinner at 6:00 with you. When I was a kid, the street lights went on, you went home, you better be there, and that's really the only time we got to commune with a quiet, like a Chabad, a retreat.
Right.
And my dad was, when TV became the thing, why can't we sit and watch TV at dinner? Because that's not what dinner is for. I said, well, we didn't understand it then, but the older I get, the more I understand things. But it's been great talking to you. And again, I have a whole nother page of notes of things that I could, so we'll get to them.
Okay, with God's help.
Make that a promise?
With God's help. Yes.
So, and again, remember to catch Rabbi Perl's show, 8 a.m. on Sunday. And he's on for a full hour from starting now, and very interesting. And again, I feel like I've been to Chabad and heard your sermon, and I'm going to take that with me when I walk out of the station.
Bill, we made you today an honorary member of Chabad in Mineola.
Deal. I love it. I need a plaque. Be well, Rabbi Perl, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you to you and all your listeners. Thank you so much, everybody.
Okay, and the clock on the wall says it's time for this week's Long Island News to move on out of here. We thank you for joining us. Remind you can catch this week's Long Island News every Friday at 3 o'clock, right here on the station that helps you communicate, 90.3 WHPC.